Welcome to Quantum Quill Story Editions. In this series, the world's greatest classics are reimagined through fully original modern adaptations, crafted to preserve the spirit, emotional power, and enduring ideas of the original works, while offering a refined and immersive experience for contemporary listeners. Tonight's story is inspired by The Time Machine, a tale of invention, of ambition, of humanity standing at the edge of its own future. What begins as a scientific triumph soon becomes something far stranger, a journey beyond civilization, beyond memory, and beyond the illusion that progress alone can save us from ourselves. In the distant future, beauty hides decay, comfort conceals horror, and the final destiny of mankind waits in silence beneath a dying sun. This is not an abridgment. It is a new telling, faithful in spirit, original in expression. So settle in, dim the lights, and travel forward into the deep future. The machine is waiting. Act 1. On Thursday evening, after the plates had been cleared and the fire had settled into a low, deliberate glow, Adrian Vale began to explain the impossible. He did not announce it as impossible. That was not his way. He spoke as if the thing had already happened, as if the rest of us were late to an appointment with reason. Time, he said, is not a river. It is a road. Philby laughed first. He always did. And I suppose you have built a carriage? Vale turned toward him with mild patience. Not a carriage. The room quieted. Vale rose, went to the long walnut cabinet, and returned, carrying a small apparatus no larger than a mantel clock. It was made of silvered metal, translucent crystal, and ivory-colored arcs that caught the lamplight strangely, as if some portion of the object refused to remain still. This, he said, placing it on the table, is a model. A model of what? Asked the doctor. Vale's eyes brightened. Of a machine designed to move through duration as deliberately as a ship moves through water. No one spoke. Then Philby said, "You are serious." "I am exact." He showed us two levers, one pale, one dark. The pale lever, he said, drew the machine forward through time. The dark one reversed its course. He invited us to inspect the table, the carpet, the underside of the device, his sleeves, even the lamp. The psychologist bent close. Beautiful workmanship. 2 years of it, Vale replied. Then, with theatrical restraint, he refused to touch the lever himself. He asked the psychologist to do it. The man hesitated, smiled awkwardly, and pressed the pale lever. There was a faint rush of air. The lamp flame bent sideways. The little machine trembled, blurred, glittered like an insect's wing in sunlight, and vanished. For several seconds, none of us breathed. Philby dropped to his knees and looked under the table. Vale laughed softly. "It has not fallen. It has gone." "Gone where?" I asked. His answer was quiet. "Away from now." A week later, we returned to his house more out of curiosity than belief. Vale was absent when dinner began. A note instructed us to eat without him. We were midway through the meal when the door opened. He stood there barefoot, filthy, bruised, and pale as ash. His evening clothes were torn. Dried blood marked his chin. His hair seemed older than it had been 7 days before. He looked at us with the exhausted astonishment of a man who had escaped drowning and could still hear the sea. "Wine," he said. The doctor hurried to him. Vale drank, shuddered, and gripped the edge of the table. "I have been," he said, "farther than any man has any right to go." Philby's face changed. The editor, who had not attended the earlier dinner, leaned forward with delight. "You mean to say you did it?" Vale ignored him. "I must wash, then I will tell you. No interruptions, no argument. I have not strength for either." When he returned, clean but still hollow-eyed, we gathered in the smoking room. He sat beneath the lamp, one hand wrapped around a glass he did not drink from. "I finished the machine this morning," he began. "At 10 o'clock, by the laboratory clock, I seated myself in it. I had imagined triumph. Instead, I felt terror. The terror of a man placing his hand upon a door that may open into fire." He gave a faint smile. "Still, I opened it." At first, he said, nothing seemed to happen. Then, he looked at the laboratory clock. Hours had passed in seconds. He pressed the lever farther. The room dimmed. The housekeeper crossed the laboratory like a streak of smoke. Day and night began to alternate, then flicker, then fuse into a silver whirl. The sun became a blazing ribbon across the sky. The moon pulsed like a pale wound opening and closing. Seasons flashed over the earth in breaths. Green, gold, white, green again. Buildings rose, dissolved, were replaced by stranger forms. Trees grew like fountains and vanished like mist. The land itself seemed to breathe. "I meant to stop after a year," Vale said. "Then after a century. Then after I had seen enough. But enough became a meaningless word." He went on. The machine shuddered. Fear returned, not of motion, but of arrival. What if he stopped inside a wall, a tree, a mountain? What if his body and the future attempted to occupy the same inch of space? At last, in panic, he dragged back the lever. The machine overturned. He was thrown onto wet grass beneath a storm of hail. When he opened his eyes, the world was warm, vast, and unfamiliar. The first thing he saw was a white stone figure rising beyond flowering shrubs, a sphinx-like monument, winged and weather-worn, smiling with blind patience over the garden of the future. Around it stood great buildings, pale and monumental, their arches broken by age but still graceful. The air smelled of rain, flowers, and something intensely clean, as though disease itself had been washed from the world. Then the people came. They were small, delicate, and beautiful, graceful as children, in ceremonial garments, with soft hair, bright eyes, and voices like water over glass. They showed no fear of him. They touched his sleeves, his hands, the machine, laughing with gentle curiosity. Vale removed the levers at once and put them in his pocket. The creatures crowned him with flowers. "They were not gods," he said. "That was my first disappointment. They were not philosophers. That was my second. They were children, with the bodies of adults and the memories of a civilization they no longer understood." They led him into a great hall where fruit lay piled on low stone tables. The place had once been splendid, but dust hung in the curtains, Cracks ran through the polished surfaces, and the windows were broken in jeweled fragments. Still, the little people ate, laughed, sang, and drifted away whenever thought required effort. He tried to learn their language. They tired quickly. They gave him names for fruit, flowers, sky, eating, sleep. Their attention fluttered from him to one another and back again, never landing long enough to become inquiry. By evening, Vale climbed a hill alone. Below him lay the future Earth, impossibly beautiful. No roads, no fences, no smoke, no factories, no marks of ownership. Palaces stood among gardens, rivers shone under the descending sun. Flowers grew where cities must once have been. At first, he said, I believed mankind had won. He imagined war ended, hunger cured, disease conquered, labor abolished. The world had become a garden because humanity had subdued every wilderness, every danger, every necessity. And then, having nothing left to struggle against, humanity had softened. Strength had become unnecessary, intelligence ornamental, courage obsolete. I thought I understood them, Vale said. That was my great error. The moon rose. The little people disappeared indoors. A chill entered the air. Vale looked down toward the lawn, where he had landed. The white sphinx glimmered in the moonlight. The shrubs stirred faintly around its pedestal. The machine was gone. He stopped speaking then, and for a moment we heard only the fire settling in the grate. When he resumed, his voice was lower. I ran. I do not remember deciding to run. I was simply running. Down the hill, through the garden, past the sleeping flowers, with one thought hammering inside me. I had lost my century. I had lost my home. I had lost all human company except those pretty, helpless creatures who could not understand the meaning of loss. He reached the lawn. Empty. He searched the shrubs. He struck the bronze pedestal. He shouted at the Sphinx, as if stone could confess. Then he ran to the great hall and woke the little people, demanding his machine, in words they did not know. They trembled, laughed, cried, scattered. He saw their fear and was ashamed, but shame did not restore the machine. Near dawn, exhausted, he collapsed beneath the Sphinx. I had gone forward to discover the triumph of man, he said. Instead, I had become the last man alive. Act 2. Vale slept through the sunrise and woke cold, stiff, and furious. The white stone face of the Sphinx hovered above him, serene in the morning light. Dew shimmered on the grass. Birds with iridescent wings moved through the flowering shrubs in flashes of blue and silver. Somewhere in the distance came laughter, the light, musical laughter of the small future people. It sounded intolerable. I remember thinking, Vale said, that paradise ought not to laugh. He stood and forced himself into calm. Panic had accomplished nothing. If the machine had been taken, then someone or something had taken it. That meant intention. Intention meant possibility. The little people emerged cautiously from the great hall as the sun climbed higher. Their fear of him had already faded. One of them, a young woman with bronze gold hair and wide grey eyes, approached, carrying fruit, cupped carefully in both hands. She offered it to him without speaking. Vale accepted it. She was the first among them, who seemed capable of sustained attention, he said. The others drifted through existence like petals on water, but she watched. Her name, as nearly as he could pronounce it, was Weena. Over the following days, she attached herself to him with quiet persistence. She followed him through the gardens, sat beside him during meals, and laughed whenever he mispronounced their words. Though her language remained fragmentary to him, he learned enough to ask simple questions. The answers troubled him. The little people, whom he privately named the Eloi, worked no fields, built no structures, maintained no machines. They slept communally in decaying palaces whose original purpose they no longer understood. They feared darkness instinctively, but could not explain why. Most disturbing of all, they feared wells. The strange bronze-ringed shafts he had noticed throughout the landscape descended deep into the earth. Warm air breathed steadily upward from them, carrying a faint, metallic odor. Whenever Vale approached one, the Eloi became agitated and attempted to lead him away. "What is below?" he asked repeatedly. They only shook their heads. At night, he began hearing sounds, not voices, machinery, a distant rhythmic pounding beneath the earth. He also noticed another detail. Many of the ancient buildings showed signs of repair, not elegant repair, but functional reinforcement. Iron braces, new bolts, fresh scratches in the metal. Someone was still working in this world, and someone had hidden the time machine. "I ceased believing in paradise then," Vale said. "A paradise does not maintain ventilation shafts." One afternoon, while exploring a ruined gallery overgrown with crimson vines, Vale asked Weena to show him the place where the machine had vanished. She became visibly distressed. Still, she led him back to the Sphinx. The great stone monument stood alone upon its bronze pedestal, silent beneath the blazing sun. Up close, Vale noticed fine seams running along the base. Doors. The pedestal was hollow. He searched desperately for an opening mechanism, but none appeared. The doors remained sealed. They had not destroyed the machine, he said. They had imprisoned it. That realization brought relief and fear. If something intended to keep him trapped, it would not surrender its advantage easily. That evening, the sky darkened under heavy clouds. Warm wind swept through the gardens. The Eloi gathered nervously inside the great hall long before sunset. Weena remained beside him near the doorway. Then the lights went out. Not lamps. There were no lamps, but the luminous tubes embedded in the walls. One by one, they dimmed until the hall sank into shadow. The Eloi panicked instantly. They huddled together, clutching one another, whimpering softly. Vale heard movement in the darkness, not above, below, a scraping sound, then another, slow, deliberate. He lit a match. The tiny flame illuminated pale, terrified faces, and behind them, near one of the distant archways, a pair of reflective eyes staring from the dark. The match burned his fingers and died. Something moved quickly. The Eloi screamed. Vale struck another match and caught only glimpses. White hair, grey skin, enormous eyes adapted for darkness, long pale limbs disappearing into the lower corridors. The creatures fled from the flame. That fact fixed itself in his mind instantly. Fire frightened them. When dawn came, the Eloi behaved as though nothing had happened. They laughed in the gardens. They slept in the sun. They refused even to acknowledge the terror of the previous night. But Vale understood now. There are two species of humanity, he said quietly, not one. He spent the next several days investigating the wells. The Eloi refused to accompany him. Only Weena followed at a distance, trembling visibly whenever he approached the shafts. At last, he descended. Iron rungs disappeared into darkness for hundreds of feet. Warm air rose steadily around him, damp and mechanical. The deeper he climbed, the louder the underground machinery became. Then came the smell. Oil, dust, animal musk. At the bottom stretched a vast subterranean world of tunnels and enormous machines still operating after untold centuries. Great wheels rotated silently in the dark. Belts moved, pistons breathed, and among them moved the underground creatures. Morlocks. They were human, Vale said, but humanity altered by darkness, labor, and generations beneath the earth. Their skin was pale as fungus. Their eyes reflected even the faintest light. Their movements were quick, nervous, simian. Yet the machinery around them proved intelligence remained alive below ground in ways it had died above. One of them saw him. The creature froze. Vale raised his match instinctively. The Morlock recoiled at once, shielding its face. Others appeared farther back in the tunnels, watching him silently. Then the lights failed. Complete darkness swallowed the underground world. Vale heard them moving, not running, closing in. "I have never known fear like that," he said. "Not because they were monsters, because they were men." He struck match after match while climbing upward. White hands reached from the darkness. Fingers brushed his boots. Something seized his ankle. He kicked free and climbed faster, hearing their breathing beneath him all the way to the surface. When he emerged into daylight, he collapsed beside the well, gasping. Weena ran to him immediately. The others stayed away. That evening, he finally understood the truth. The Eloi were not the heirs of civilization. They were its livestock. A long silence followed those words. The fire cracked softly. The editor shifted uneasily in his chair. Vale continued. In our age, wealth had already begun separating humanity into classes that scarcely understood one another. Those who labored underground, those who lived above. The division widened century after century until adaptation completed what society began. The Eloi descended from the privileged class, delicate, idle, helpless. The Morlocks descended from workers forced underground among machines and darkness until the earth itself remade them. And eventually, Vale said, the balance reversed. The Morlocks maintained the machinery that sustained the world above. They clothed the Eloi, fed them, preserved them, for food. Weena sat beside him while he explained it as gently as he could through signs and fragments of language. She listened with wide, wounded eyes, but seemed unable fully to grasp the horror. The Eloi possessed almost no historical memory. The past had dissolved for them into dream. Yet that night, she refused to sleep away from him. Vale decided then that he would recover the machine or die attempting it. He began planning carefully. The Morlocks feared light and flame. That gave him advantage, but he needed weapons, tools, knowledge. Most importantly, he needed access to the sealed bronze pedestal beneath the Sphinx. Weena showed him an immense ruined structure far beyond the river, a vast green edifice whose shattered facade glimmered beneath climbing ivy. Inside, he hoped, there might be remnants of the old scientific world. Weapons, perhaps. Matches. Something. They left at dawn together. The journey carried them through silent forests and overgrown avenues where broken statues leaned beneath flowering vines. The world remained beautiful beyond reason, and the beauty only deepened the horror beneath it. Several times, Vale noticed pale figures observing them from distant shadows, Morlocks, watching, waiting. By afternoon, they reached the great green structure. Its immense bronze doors hung open. Inside stretched colossal galleries lined with decaying exhibits beneath shattered glass ceilings. Dust lay thick over everything. At first, Vale believed it a museum. Then he realized it was more than that. It was a tomb for human achievement. Rusting machines, fragments of engines, books crumbled into powder at his touch, skeletons of inventions whose purposes no longer mattered. Entire civilizations, he said softly, reduced to exhibits no one remained intelligent enough to understand. Still, among the ruins, he found what he needed. Camphor, matches sealed in ancient tins, metal bars that could serve as clubs. Weena watched him anxiously as he gathered supplies. Then darkness began to fall, and from somewhere deep within the ruined museum came the sound of movement. Not one creature, many. Vale extinguished his lantern immediately. The museum fell silent. Then came the breathing, close, surrounding them. Weena gripped his arm so tightly her nails broke skin. Vale struck a match. Dozens of pale eyes flashed in the darkness beyond the pillars. The Morlocks had followed them. Act 3. The match burned down to Vale's fingertips. In its brief flare, he saw them clearly for the first time. Morlocks crowded the ruined hall between toppled machines and shattered display cases, their pale bodies half hidden in the dark like creatures formed from the underground itself. Their eyes reflected the flame in silver-green flashes. They did not rush him immediately. They watched, calculating, waiting for darkness to return. Weena buried herself against his side, trembling so violently he could feel her heartbeat through the thin fabric of her tunic. Vale lit another match. The nearest Morlocks recoiled with hissing cries, shrinking from the light. "Back!" he shouted, though he knew they could not understand him. Or perhaps they understood perfectly. He seized Weena's hand and moved deeper into the museum. The vast building groaned around them in the rising wind. Moonlight filtered through the fractured ceiling, in pale shafts that vanished into blackness between the pillars. They passed ancient exhibits collapsing into rust and dust, skeletons of giant beasts, corroded engines, broken statues of forgotten thinkers. Human achievement had become archaeological debris. The future, Vale said bitterly, had not conquered death. It had merely outlived memory. The Morlocks followed soundlessly. Every time the matches dimmed, pale figures advanced. Every fresh flame drove them back. But the box of matches was not endless. At last, Vale found a narrow chamber whose walls still held together beneath the weight of centuries. He dragged splintered cabinets across the entrance and gathered dry debris into a rough barricade. The Morlocks circled outside, watching. Weena sat curled against the wall, her enormous eyes fixed upon him with terrified trust. It struck Vale suddenly how utterly defenseless she was. The Eloi possessed no instinct for resistance. Danger had existed so long outside their understanding that courage itself had vanished from them. She touched his bruised hand gently. "You stay," she whispered, in her soft, broken language. It was one of the few phrases she had mastered. Vale smiled despite himself. "Yes," he said quietly, "I stay." But he did not sleep. All night he listened to the movement outside the barricade, scratching, breathing, waiting. At dawn, the Morlocks retreated underground. Vale emerged cautiously into the grey morning light. The museum stood silent once more. He searched the ruined galleries until midday and found what he needed among the remnants of a long-dead chemical exhibit, containers of volatile powder still preserved within sealed metal cylinders, combustible, enough to make fire spread quickly. As his plan formed, he hated it, yet he saw no other path. "The Morlocks had my machine," he told us. "They controlled the Sphinx, and they would never surrender it while they possessed the advantage of darkness." He and Weena left the museum before evening, carrying bundles of dry branches and the salvaged chemicals. The forests through which they traveled seemed increasingly alive with unseen movement. Several times Vale glimpsed pale faces slipping between the trees. The Morlocks were herding them. By dusk, they reached a wooded region of towering dark growth unlike any forest Vale had seen before. The trunks rose, smooth and immense, into a canopy so dense it nearly extinguished the fading light. The Eloi refused to enter such places after sunset. Now, Vale understood why. The forest belonged to the Morlocks. Night fell rapidly. The sounds began almost at once. Branches shifting, soft feet, breathing from unseen places. Vale built a ring of fire around their resting place, igniting the dry wood with precious matches. Flames rose crackling into the darkness. The Morlocks kept their distance, visible only occasionally beyond the trees as white moving shapes. Weena slept fitfully beside him. Vale remained awake, gripping an iron bar. Then, sometime after midnight, the wind changed. The flames spread. At first slowly, then violently. The dry forest erupted with terrifying speed. Fire climbed the towering trunks in spirals of orange and gold. Smoke rolled through the trees. Burning branches crashed around them. The Morlocks screamed. It was the most horrifying sound Vale had ever heard. Not animal cries, but human agony distorted by generations underground. They fled in panic from the advancing fire, straight toward the only place not yet engulfed, toward Vale. They forgot their fear of flame, he said quietly, because they feared death more. Pale bodies burst from the smoke in waves. Vale swung the iron bar desperately. Firelight strobed across twisting faces and clawing hands. Weena cried out behind him. A Morlock seized Vale from the side and dragged him to the ground. He felt fingers close around his throat. Then flames surged between them. The creature recoiled, shrieking. Vale scrambled upright and reached for Weena. She was gone. Smoke blinded him. Burning branches crashed from above. Morlocks and fire surrounded him on every side. He shouted her name again and again. No answer came. At last, the heat became unbearable. The entire forest roared like a furnace. Vale barely escaped ahead of the advancing wall of flame, stumbling through smoke until dawn broke over blackened earth. When the fires finally died, he searched the ruins for hours. He never found Weena. For the first time since beginning his story, Vale stopped speaking entirely. His hand trembled slightly against the arm of the chair. No one interrupted. When he resumed, his voice had grown quieter. "I think," he said, "that her death affected me more than the extinction of mankind." He returned alone to the Sphinx. The bronze doors still showed no opening, but now he noticed fresh marks near the base, scratches in the metal, recent movement, traces of oil. The Morlocks were using it regularly, so he waited. All day he sat beside the monument, pretending indifference, while the Eloi played among the gardens. Beneath the serenity of the future world, tension tightened invisibly. At sunset, the bronze doors opened, only slightly, but enough. A Morlock emerged carrying bundles of clothing. Vale moved instantly. He struck the creature aside and hurled himself through the opening before the doors could close again. He found himself inside a vast chamber beneath the pedestal, and there, his time machine, untouched, waiting. For one brief moment, relief overwhelmed him, so completely he nearly collapsed. Then the Morlocks attacked. They poured from hidden corridors all around the chamber, pale bodies surging through darkness toward him. Vale leapt into the saddle of the machine, fumbling frantically for the levers in his pocket. Hands seized the frame. One creature climbed onto the platform beside him, shrieking. Vale slammed the forward lever. The world exploded into motion. The Morlock was torn away instantly. Light and darkness fused around him once more as centuries began to race past. The Sphinx dissolved into blur. Forests rose and vanished. Seas shifted. Buildings crumbled into dust. But this time, Vale did not stop. "I could not bear returning immediately," he said, "not after what I had seen." So he traveled farther, millions of years. The earth slowed beneath a dying sun. The sky darkened into deep crimson. Strange vegetation spread across silent beaches beneath cold twilight. No birds flew, no mammals moved. At the edge of a black sea, he saw enormous crab-like creatures dragging themselves over blood-red sand beneath the final sunset of the world. Even farther still, the sun dimmed. Snow fell upon a silent, dying earth, beneath a sky nearly devoid of stars. Nothing remained. No cities, no humanity, no memory. Only wind, moving over frozen stone, beneath the last, weak light of creation. I realized then, Vale whispered, that all empires, all philosophies, all triumphs of mankind end in the same silence. Fear seized him, unlike any before. Not fear of death, fear of meaninglessness. He reversed the lever violently. Time surged backward in impossible torrents. Civilizations flashed and vanished. The green world returned. Then the spinning centuries of history. Then finally, his laboratory. The machine crashed onto the floor. The clock showed only a few hours had passed. Vale looked around our silent faces. "I have told you the truth," he said. "Believe it or do not. It alters nothing." The fire had burned low. No one moved. The editor stared into space, unable to summon his usual skepticism. The doctor's cigarette had long since gone out between his fingers. Vale reached slowly into his pocket. From it, he removed two small white flowers, unlike any species known to modern botany. "They were in my pocket when I returned," he said. "Weena placed them there." He laid them gently upon the table. No one spoke. Outside, somewhere beyond the curtained windows, the ordinary world continued untouched by his revelation. Carriages rolled through wet streets. Clocks marked the hour. People argued, dined, loved, planned futures for themselves. Yet around us lingered the terrible certainty that all futures end. Vale stood at last. "I am tired," he said. He carried the flowers upstairs with him. The following morning, he was gone. So was the time machine. And so the journey ends. Not with triumph, but with a question. What becomes of humanity when struggle disappears? What survives when comfort replaces purpose? And how fragile is civilization when separated from memory, sacrifice, and wonder? More than a century after its first publication, The Time Machine remains one of the most haunting visions in all of science fiction, not merely because it imagines the future, but because it forces us to examine the path that leads there. Thank you for listening to this Quantum Quill Story Edition. In this series, timeless classics are reimagined through fully original modern adaptations designed to preserve the spirit and emotional power of the original works while creating an immersive experience for today's audience. If you enjoyed this story, the original Quantum Quill Classic Series edition of The Time Machine is available in paperback, ebook, and audiobook formats at Quantum Quill Publishing. Explore the full collection at quantumquillpublishing.com. Until next time, keep reading, keep wondering, and keep imagining what waits beyond the horizon of time.